Hello, Jacksonites, and welcome to episode 10 of My Honda Thon. We're nearing the epic finale of this series, but we still gotta get through today's movie. Today I'll be reviewing the extremely bizarre, extremely trippy, somewhat sorta kinda rare, but still has a legacy in and of itself. Japanese horror film. It's actually labeled as a horror film, at least on Wikipedia. Matango, also known as Attack of the Mushroom People. Attack of the Mushroom People. Directed by Ishiro Honda from 1963. I think I mentioned that already. So yes, indeed, this is the semi-sorta-kinda infamous film from 1963 that Ishiro Honda made that is considered by some people to be one of Ishiro Honda's best films. And I can sort of agree with that, but I also in a couple of ways kind of have to disagree with that. Matango is an extremely strange film. That's actually kind of it's a bit of an understatement. This movie is probably the Infinite the Darkness. Hello, Infinite the Darkness. Oh my god, I got 4 viewers. Hello, Infinite the Darkness, even though I'm not quite sure who you are, but thank you for joining. So, anyway, Matango is an extremely strange fucking film. For the longest time, this movie eluded me. For various reasons. Part of it was due to disinterest for the longest time. Another part of it was just this movie wasn't readily available to me for the longest time. And also another part of that was because I couldn't find the film, which kind of goes into the second reason. But Matango, for the longest time, eluded me. And I always had the feeling that this was going to be the one Ishiro Honda movie that I never would purchase. However, boy, was I wrong, as a few months ago, or not a few months ago, it was almost a year ago. No, not almost a year ago. About 8 months ago, I was at my local FYE at the mall, and I was looking around for something to purchase, and I looked up at the cashier because I like to converse with the cashiers because I'm a regular in there, and I just so happened to notice one of the cashier ladies putting a sticker on Matango, and I caught a glimpse of that, and I said, "How much is that movie?" This movie cost me $11.99. I shit you not. That is a steal for this movie. Even though now I guess it's gotten another short re-release because I have noticed it goes for $24.95 on Amazon plus free shipping. But still, for the longest time, this movie was like $80 or $90 on Amazon, and I unfortunately I have to shell out $58 to get the Godzilla vs. Biollante. Hello, Griffin Chalk. I don't know quite who that is, but whatever. Thank you for joining. I have to shell out $58 for the Godzilla vs. Biollante Blu-ray, but there's no way in hell that you're going to ever get me to shell out $90 to purchase one film, and admittedly one that I never really was very interested in. But I figured I'm never going to get this chance again, so I swooped in and I purchased Matango, and I watched it right when I got home. And now, of course, before I purchased the film, I had seen Adam Noyes' Ishiro Honda-thon episode, and that movie kind of made me a little interested, or not movie, but that review made me a little interested in seeing the film, but I wasn't jumping for joy and screaming to myself, gotta go see it, gotta go see it, gotta go see it, where is it, I gotta get it. But it drew my interest a little bit. So I watched the film and I wasn't disappointed per se, but I also wasn't exactly. It's not. I wasn't pleasantly surprised. Um, Matango is just an extremely strange film, and have you watched the Angry Grandpa show? Of course, I've watched the Angry Grandpa show. I'm still subscribed to him, even though he has passed away. Um, anyway, so Matango, I don't really know much about the production of this film, except for the fact that it's partially based on William H. Hodgson's the short story, "The Voice in the Night," and also apparently it was initially going to be banned in Japan due to the special effects. Sorry. On the mutated humans resembling victims of the atomic bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. And that's really all that I know about the production for this film, admittedly. But Matango, I definitely would say, is one of Ishiro Honda's most unique films. And I would probably say it's Ishiro Honda's most unique tokusatsu film. This is not a kaiju film. This really is not a. Actually, no, not really. It isn't a kaiju film at all. Um, it's it's a psychological thriller slash horror film that just so happens to have a lot of special effects. Uh, the best way I can describe this movie is that it's very much so. It's two things. One, it's a big prototype J horror film, Japanese horror film. Even though it is labeled as a horror film, this is a pretty tame horror film, though it is very psychological and it is very much a suspenseful thriller. But for me, this is a very tame horror film, and this is also not the type of horror film that I'm the biggest fan of, and that is kind of what's gonna label my opinions of this film. I don't hate it. Don't get me wrong. I don't hate this movie. It's a very well made film. It's a very well thought out film. It's all overall a very well executed movie. I just overall am not the absolute biggest fan of this movie for reasons that I'll get into when I get to my pros and cons of the film. But I can say that I am glad that I've seen this movie. I've only watched this movie twice. But I can say that I am glad to have seen this movie, and I am glad to own it, of course. Um, However, in the general scope of Ishiro Honda movies, unfortunately, I do kind of have to rank this kind of low. Again, I'll get to why towards the end of this video. So let's get into the plot synopsis. Does Big Jack Films have hangouts? Um, I don't really know how to do Google Hangouts. He doesn't really know how to work them very well himself. So I guess he does, but I don't. Anyway, the plot of Matango it's kind of it's kind of busy, but it's also just really really confusing. In Tokyo, a man travels to a university professor named Kenji, played by Akira Kubo, who is being held in the psycho ward of a hospital. And he tells the man of what happened to him. He says it sounds crazy, but he's not actually insane. Uh, the, it's kind of that no, this movie has that trope of most of the movie is just one big long flashback. The beginning and very end of the film take place in present time, but the big chunk, like 90% of the movie, is one big giant flashback. Which I can't really say I've seen that before in a Toho film, so props for this movie for doing something new here, so kudos for that. But anyway, a Japanese yacht uh, out in the middle of the ocean, encounters a nasty storm that nearly ends up capsizing the whole thing. And the crew include Kenji, who's a skipper, Naoyuki, played by Hiroshi Koizumi, his shipmate assistant named Senzo, I think that's how you pronounce it, played by Kenji Sahara, writer Etsuro Yoshida, played by Hiroshi Tachikawa, celebrity Masafumi Kasai, played by Yoshio Tsuchiya. Hang on a second, I'm getting a lot of messages here. Shit, where was I? The owner of who is also the owner of the yacht, and two female passengers, one being Mami, M-A-M-I, not M-O-M-M-Y, Mami, I guess, played by Kumi Mizuno, and student Akiko, played by Miki Yashiro. No, make a picture, you're not late. Okay, sorry about that. Yeah, and student Akiko, played by Miki Yashiro, who I kind of have to admit is the weakest character in this movie, but I'll get to her later. The storm leaves their ship in total ruin, and the ship has no rudder or sails to steer by, so they are forced to basically drift out in the middle of the ocean, just kind of hope for the best. A few days later, the group arrive at a seemingly deserted island, not long after hearing a radio announcement pronouncing them lost at sea. And after spending a day in search of supplies, being food and water, they come across ponds that appear to be man-made, full of fresh rainwater, and also a forest of mushrooms that is just seemingly, with no end in sight. However, now Yuki warns them not to eat them, even as hungry as they are, as they may be poisonous. As they cross the island, they come across a shipwreck on the beach, and even though it looks like it's only been there for about a year, the ship's sails are almost completely rotted away, and the interior of the ship is covered with some type of mysterious fungus that has spread throughout the ship. Noticing that the mold can be cleaned by strong cleansing products, they work to clear it from the ship. And when doing this, they begin to suspect that this ship had been involved in some sort of atomic testing of the polluted waters, forcing mutations on various objects, including the mushrooms. And as the days go by, the group begin to grow stir-crazy and restless as their food supply starts to get lower and lower and lower. It's typical cabin fever type scenario, though it hadn't really been done before in Japanese horror films before. At least none that I've seen. I haven't really seen that many Japanese horror films, admittedly, but from what I've seen, this is the first time it was really executed. Especially first time Toho ever did it. They tried to acquire eggs from turtles and birds. However, various birds seem to actively avoid the island, and with Kasai refusing to help find a way to get off of this island, he starts stealing food from the food stores. Yoshida starts to get kind of restless himself, and eventually he starts eating the mushrooms on the island instead of seaweed, potatoes, and various other food products that they can find to sustain themselves. And one night, as Kasai is once again sneaking into the food storage, he is attacked by a grotesque mushroom-covered warty-looking man who promptly disappears after encountering the entire group. This scene kind of implies that it was a ghost, and all of them saw it due to their shared delusion, uh, which leads them to start to suspect that something indeed is very wrong with the island. And then shortly after this, Yoshida and Kasai start to fight over Kumi Mizuno character's Mami's affections. And Yoshida goes nuts as a direct result of him eating the mushrooms. He pulls a gun on the group, but he is locked in Kasai's room. Now Yuki decides that they got to get the fuck off of this island in order to survive. However, the others disagree, so he decides to depart on his own. Mami frees Yoshida, and they try to take over the ship, and they shoot and kill Senzo in the process. Kenji and Akiko manage to get control from them and force them off the ship, firing off a few shots into the ground to scare them off. Kenji finds the yacht totally adrift and swims out towards it. However, when he gets on board, he finds now Yuki missing with a note left behind, explaining that he is responsible for the deaths of the group and that he has jumped overboard. And on the ship, Kasai is confronted by Mami, and she entices him to follow her into the forest on the island. And perpetual rainfall has caused wild mushroom growth. And Kasai realizes that those who have been eating the shrooms turn into mushrooms themselves. And due to its addictive nature, nobody can break their need of the shrooms once they take a bite. It's kind of reminiscent of the Cave of the Lotus Eaters from Greek mythology. And that is the first sign that this movie is just one big drug metaphor. And Kasai is last seen collapsing to the ground inside the forest as the shrooms begin to swarm over him. While this is going on, Akiko and Kenji are attacked by mushroom people. They are separated, and Akiko is taken into the woods. Kenji tracks her down, and he discovers that she had been fed mushrooms and is under the influence along with Mami, Yoshida, and Kasai, all of them in the process of being partially mutated into mushroom people themselves. Kenji attempts to rescue Akiko, however, he is overwhelmed by the shrooms and he flees without her, making his way onto the yacht and escapes the island. Several days pass before he is finally rescued, and as he waits, he begins to wonder if he should have stayed with Akiko on the island. He then turns towards the audience, his face covered in fungal growth, and states that it wouldn't have made a difference had he stayed on the island or not, but he would have been happier there with the love of his life. And the screen fades as Kenji notes that humans are not much different than the shroom people as the camera pans over a night-lit Tokyo on kind of a extremely ambiguous ending that admittedly I'm not the biggest fan of. So how about this plot? Well, it definitely is very original, but it does have some non-original tropes into it. Like I said, this movie has a lot of the typical cabin fever type cliches. However, the cabin fever type genre wasn't really exploited nearly as much as it is nowadays, especially with the Eli Roth film Cabin Fever. So here it's not nearly as cliche, but there are still a lot of tropes in this movie that do seem familiar, especially if you're watching this, if you're a horror movie fan, which I am, but this is not the type of horror movie that I'm much of a fan of. So, what are the pros and cons of Matango? The pros, first off, the production values for this movie are really, really fucking good. I'm not entirely sure if they did location shooting for this movie. Actually, no, I wouldn't. I'm pretty sure that they did. But these production values are so good that a lot of times I I couldn't tell if these movies were, or not these movies, if these sets were actual sets or they were actual parts of the world that the production team found that yes, the only thing that was familiar to you is the laugh of the mushroom people. It's Alien Bolton's laugh. But this came before Alien Bolton, so technically it's the mushroom people laugh. But anyway, um, the sets used for, I think they are sets for the ghost ship and parts of the island, but they're so well made and so convincing that I actually thought a few times throughout the film is that did they actually find an abandoned shipwrecked ghost ship to make a movie around? I'm pretty sure they didn't, but they're so well made and so convincing that it had me fooled in quite a few scenes. So I'll give a movie a great amount of respect if it can actually fool me into thinking that, is this an actual location that they shot on? And also the forest sets themselves, they're very well constructed. They're extremely full of vegetation. They're very different from the tropical islands that are seen in like movies like Son of Godzilla or Destroy All Monsters or Godzilla vs. Sea Monster. This movie's island, it does sort of look tropical, but it also looks very inland, foresty-esque. So they're really full of vegetation. They're not spacious and sunny and hot and breezy like they look in a lot of tropical island movies. This looks like it almost looks like an alien type forest. That even though it takes place on Earth, it looks so different to how a lot of other forests look that it looks completely unrecognizable, or almost completely unrecognizable. So it definitely scores some points for that. But also the location shooting that they do here also looks very good. The cinematography for this movie is very, very well done. Again, it's very horror movie-esque, so that's good. I mean, who knew Ishiro Honda would be pretty good at making horror films? Granted, some people do consider the original Gojira to be a horror movie. I don't, but I can kind of see where they get it from. But still, this is an actual horror movie, so, and Ishiro Honda does a pretty decent job at it. The special effects are also very, very, very well done. Even though they're kind of minimalistic, you don't see the mushroom people all that much. They have maybe 4 minutes of screen time in the entire movie. This movie is only 89 minutes long, so that's definitely a good testament to it. But the suits themselves, they're very, very well constructed. They look inhumanoid, but they also look humanoid in a very disturbing and very trippy and very just creepy fashion. And not to mention that the laugh that they have for the mushroom people, it's very trippy and it's very eerie. It's it's very echoey and it's very loud, and you also have this kind of low-pitched chirping sound throughout the laughs as well, so that it gives it a very creepy sound, like you're being surrounded by a bunch of retarded freakazoids who just want to smother you and kill you. It's very, very Evie. It's very, very eerie. And also the makeup effects used for the human characters when they're morphing into mushroom men looks very, very good. It actually looks like they have fungal infections spreading throughout their body, like very, very gradually. Like you'll see some shots where their fingers are kind of fusing together into one hand, or they'll see a hand morphing in or fusing into their shoulders. You'll see fungal infections growing all over their face and their body. It's just very, very unpleasant to look at, and it looks disgusting. And to see these actors have these smiling expressions on their faces, and they're all doped up and high, but they're also just psychopaths coming to get you. It's very, very unnerving. Um, and also the special effects used to showcase how old the ship is. It's very well done too. This the entire when we first see the interior of the ship, there's like a 3-inch thick layer of mold all over the place, even on the walls, the ceiling, the floor. There's just mold all over the freaking place, and it is you can just I can imagine because I'm kind of allergic to mold. If I was to be in there, I would be sneezing like a motherfucker. It's not even funny. It just it looks disgusting, and it looks really like a really unpleasant place to be. The suspense in the film is also very very good. I am amazed at how well Ishiro Honda conveyed the sensation like you're being watched in this movie. It's very, very well executed. And there's a lot of moments in here in this movie where I was actually kind of peeking over my shoulder a couple of times. The suspense is very, very well executed. This movie definitely has a slow burn to it. It kind of works for me, but also in other places it doesn't. But there's a couple of scenes where the slow burn really, really does work. The scene where most of the group encounters that grotesque wart fungus looking guy, that scene is very well executed. In fact, it really reminded me of the ship scene from the H-Man. And I'll get to that. I'll get to that. Hang on, let me write something down. Where the hell's my pen? I'll get to that instead. This movie really, excuse me. But that in that scene, the suspense is very well done, and all the scenes where the characters are in, or most of the scenes where the characters are in the forest, especially in the second half of the film, the suspense is really well done there too. You feel claustrophobic, but you also feel like you're totally exposed, and you also feel like you're being watched, but you just don't know by what because you can't see it. It's a very, very well executed tension throughout the film. Total props. This movie doesn't really have any jump scares, well, because jump scares weren't really a thing back in the early '60s. But the scares overall are also well executed. Like the reveal of that mushroom man, the first one that the group sees, it's not like a pop out of nowhere type of scare. It slowly reveals its face to the characters, and when you finally do see its face in full, it kind of leaves you going, "What the fuck?" And then it goes away, and you don't see it again, and so you're kind of left wondering, where the fuck did it go? Where the hell is it? So that's well done too. Pro number 4 is the drug allegory and the drug metaphor for this film. This movie, yes, it despite it being a horror film, it also is one big giant drug allegory, because apparently at the time Japan was suffering an absolutely gigantic problem with drugs, heroin in particular. I don't know all the specifics behind the drug problem that Japan was having at the time, but I do know that it was really, really bad at the time. And of course, Ishiro Honda, seeing this, he knew that the best way to say a message about it was to make a movie, because this movie was being released by Toho, and Toho was still really big at the time. So he put that in this movie, and it definitely is a very effective message. Don't do drugs, kids, otherwise you may turn into a giant mushroom person that tries to kill people. And also the fifth and final pro that I have for this movie, it's actually probably its greatest aspect, is its cast. This movie has a really, really fucking well executed cast. Complete and total all-star cast too, with a couple exceptions, like the actress who plays Akiko. I can't really recall if she was in any other kaiju or tokusatsu movie, but this movie has a really, really, really good cast. Hiroshi Koizumi, of course, gives it a really good performance as Naoyuki. He goes against type. In fact, a lot of actors and actresses in this movie go against type. Like Hiroshi Koizumi, he kind of plays a bit of a slimy and cowardly douchebag. He's not necessarily a villain. The best way I guess I could call him a backstabber. But he tries to keep a level head for most of this movie, but toward the end of the movie, he just totally snaps and finally loses it, and just in the end, he's just looking out for number one himself. So, but Hiroshi Koizumi does a really good job as Naoyuki. Kenji Sahara does a good job as Senzo, even though I think he's a little bit underutilized. He still does a really good job, puts in a really good performance. Then again, name a movie where Kenji Sahara is in, where he gives a bad performance, except maybe Space Amoeba, but even then, not really. Hiroshi Tachikawa as Etsuro Yoshida. He's pretty good at playing his character. He's a writer, but he also admits to stealing a lot of other writers' ideas to make his own shit. And he tries to justify that by saying, well, all writers steal a lot of shit to make their own original stuff. But even then, you get the sensation that just this dude is a total slime bag. But still, he does a really good job. Yoshio Tsuchiya as Kasai, he does a really good job. He's kind of the no-nonsense badass of the group. He knows how to use a gun, he knows how to hunt, he knows how to track. But he's also kind of a backstabbing piece of shit as well. But Yoshio Tsuchiya does an excellent job as this character. Kumi Mizuno plays the slut character very, 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 very well. She kind of plays a stuck-up bitch, but she also plays a backstabbing seductress stuck-up bitch very, very well. And she's probably the strongest performance in this film. As good as Akira Kubo is as Kenji, I mean, he does a really good job too, but he's probably the second weakest character, but only because he's the only other character aside from Akiko who had the least amount of characterization, even though he is the main character. He and Akiko don't really have much going for them, especially Akiko, because she really just doesn't have much going for her. She is the definition of a damsel in distress in this movie toward the end of the film, and it's a little disappointing, but definitely the best performance in this movie is Kumi Mizuno as Mami. She acts her ass off. And I would definitely say this may be one of, if not her best role. It's not my favorite. That's Frankenstein vs. Baragon. More on that later. But overall, she does a damn good job in this film. So with all the pros being said about Matango, are there any cons? Really, I only have 3. The music score for this movie, I hate to say this, it's not very good. It's done by Sadao Beku. It is not a pleasant score to listen to. It really is not a pleasant score to listen to. I would have much rather preferred if they got Masaru Sato to do the music score for this movie, because the music score for the H-Man fit the film perfectly. Which, by the way, I forgot to mention, if you watch H-Man and Matango, you could not help yourself and make a couple comparisons, because the two films do feel very similar. For one thing, both of these movies are big drug allegories. This one more so, but H-Man definitely has a lot of drug metaphors in it too. Both are considered to be horror films, though again, this one is considered to be much more of a horror film. Both movies are directed by Ishiro Honda, and overall, both movies have a similar tone, though again, this one has a more dark, foreboding, and just unpleasant vibe. And also another thing, both movies were written by Takashi Kimura, and he was a very pessimistic and sad individual. This many people consider to be his best work. I definitely do agree. Even Takashi Kimura himself, Takashi Kimura himself considered this to be his best script, and when the movie came out, apparently he was interviewed by somebody. He just gave a quick answer. He said, "No complaints. It was good." Which goes to show. But I really don't like the music score for this movie. Not to say that it doesn't fit the film, which it kind of does, but for me that's a problem because this tone is too depressing for me. I don't really care for this movie's tone. It's too depressing. But just in general, the music score just really is not that good. I don't enjoy listening to it. Honestly, the music score was one of the biggest reasons why, for me, that upon this most recent rewatching, the music score is one of two things that really made this a tough sit for me. But overall, I don't like the music score for this movie. It's very minimalistic, which I do and don't like, because for a lot of horror movies to be scary, I feel like if they have a bombastic music score, it'll kind of kill it. This one has very minimalistic music score, which as a horror movie, it does make sense. Doesn't mean I have to like it. Overall, I just really do not like the music score. I don't like this movie's ending. I don't really have that much of an issue with ambiguous endings. But for me, I just feel like it's going against itself. Because at the beginning of the movie, Akira Kubo's face didn't have any mushroom growths all over it. But then at the ending, it does. We didn't see him eat any of the mushrooms. However, the ending implies that he actually did. And just, I really don't like I don't really like the ending to this movie. It's, again, I don't mind ambiguous endings, but I just feel like this ending is too ambiguous. To the point where it's frustrating. But my biggest problem with this movie is its pacing. It's too slow. I've said this before, I don't like slow burn horror movies. I really don't. I'm fine with a mix of both. Like if you have a pace to a horror movie that's both slow that's slow when it needs to be slow and fast when it needs to be fast, I'm fine with that. But when the overall film has an extremely slow pace, honestly, it bores me. It bores the shit out of me. And this is the biggest reason why this movie was such a tough sit, this most recent viewing, is because I've forgotten how slow this movie is. And oh my god, there was many moments where I was really struggling to get through this movie because this movie's pacing is just way too fucking slow. Way too fucking slow for me. But those really are my three issues with Matango. And outside of that, that's all I really have to say about Matango. I didn't think this episode would be so short. I guess I just really don't have much to say about it. So my final thoughts on Matango is, it certainly is Ishiro Honda's most unique film. I definitely will say that. It's his most unique film. I definitely can tell he had a lot of passion behind it in order to make it as good as possible. And it is a good film. However, it's just not for me. It's not my typical taste of Ishiro Honda. And it's really not my cup of horror film. I don't like slow burn horror movies. I'm not the biggest fan of its ending, and I really don't like this movie's music score. And this is not a fun film. Anybody who comes up to me and says Matango's a fun movie, I'd look at him like he was retarded. Seriously. And I also do have to say this. In my opinion, this is in terms of rewatchability, this movie has none of it. It's probably the most least rewatchable Ishiro Honda movie, period, counting Godzilla movies. You could watch Gojira more often than you could watch Matango. I think you can maybe get away with watching Matango once a year. Maybe. If that. This movie has very, very little rewatchability, in my opinion. Because it's such a slow burn. It has such an ambiguous ending, and its pacing is just so uneven. if you were to try to force me to watch this movie 5 times in a row, I'd probably hang myself. I would just be so emotionally drained. But with all that said, the good things I do have to say about it is to still do stand. I like how similar this is to the H-Man. I like the fact that this movie does have a metaphor and an allegory in it, because Ishiro Honda was really good at doing that type of thing. The suspense is good. The characters are amazing. The special effects and the production values are absolutely outstanding. So with all that said, I'm going to give this movie a 7 out of 10. It's not a bad film. It is a good film. It's one of Ishiro Honda. It's one of, I wouldn't quite say it's one of Ishiro Honda's best films, but I definitely would say it's one of his more notable films, and it's definitely his most unique movie. But for me, it's just not my cup of tea. I don't like slow burn horror movies. I really don't like slow burn horror movies. So a 7 out of 10 I feel like is a very respectable score. Post your comments down below. Let me know what you think. Hit the like button, hit the subscribe button. Share this video with your friends. Look forward to the next episode, which will be coming up in just a few minutes after this, where I review the original Mothra from 1961. I subverted your expectations there, because people are expecting me to go into chronological order for these last few movies. Wrong! Nah. Next is Mothra, and the last being Frankenstein vs. Baragon. Hope you'll join me for that. And as always, go out into the forest, do some exploring, don't eat the fucking mushrooms, stay off of drugs, and I'll see you in the next one.